mended his fence every morning before he woke. He never knew until the neighbor told him. The fence ran along the south boundary of Odell Crane's property, separating his 40 acres from the road that led to town, and it was falling apart. Not dramatically. It was not the kind of collapse that announces itself with noise and spectacle. It was the quiet, incremental failure of cedar posts that had been standing for 15 years in Nebraska soil and had finally exhausted their tolerance for weather, insects, and the passage of time. Each morning a new section sagged, or a rail dropped, or a post tilted at an angle that would eventually become horizontal, and each morning the fence was a little less of a fence and a little more of a suggestion. Odell did not fix it because Odell could not fix it. He was 71 years old, a widower of 6 years, a retired school teacher who had come to the Platte Valley in 1869 as a young man of 24, with a teaching certificate and a conviction that literacy was the foundation of civilization, to teach children their letters, and who had stayed because the valley was home, and leaving home at his age was not something he could imagine, even when the home's fence was collapsing one post at a time. His hands were arthritic, the knuckles swollen and stiff, the grip that had once held chalk and books and fence tools, now reduced to a careful negotiation with every object he picked up. His back was unreliable, seizing without warning and releasing without explanation, as though it operated on a schedule known only to itself. His eyesight was sufficient for reading, but not for the kind of close work that fence mending requires, and the combination of these limitations meant that the fence had been declining for 2 years, while Odell watched from the porch and felt the particular frustration of a man who can identify a problem precisely and solve it not at all. Hazel Fairburn lived a quarter-mile east on a 10-acre parcel that she had inherited from her brother, who had gone to California and decided to stay. She was 33, unmarried, lean from work and weather, with the capable hands and the no-nonsense bearing of a woman who had been managing her own affairs since she was old enough to understand that no one else would manage them for her. She raised chickens, Rhode Island Reds that she had started from chicks ordered from a catalog and that now produced enough eggs to sell a dozen a week at the general store. She kept a garden that was the most productive quarter-acre in the valley, yielding tomatoes, beans, squash, and potatoes in quantities that a family of 4 would have found generous. She did laundry for 3 families in town and split her own firewood with an axe she kept sharper than most men's razors, and patched her own roof, and lived with the quiet competence of a person who has accepted that self-sufficiency is not a preference, but a condition. She noticed the fence. She noticed it because she walked past it every morning on her way to the creek where she drew water, a walk of half a mile each way, carrying 2 buckets that weighed nothing empty and weighed everything full. Her well had gone dry in August, and the creek was the alternative until she could afford to dig a new one, and the walk took her along the south boundary of Odell's property, and the fence was impossible to miss because it was impossible to ignore. A fence that is falling down is a public statement about the person behind it, and the statement it made about Odell Crane was not accurate. Odell was not lazy or careless or indifferent. He was old and negligent are different things, and the fence did not know the difference. She started mending it on a Tuesday in early October. She came early, before dawn, while Odell was still asleep. He slept late because he was old, and sleep was one of the few activities that his body still performed without complaint. She brought a hammer and a sack of nails and a length of wire and a post that she had cut from a cedar on her own property and carried on her shoulder the quarter-mile from her place to his. Cedar is heavy, and the walk was not short, but Hazel did not consider either fact a reason not to make it, and she worked for an hour in the gray light before sunrise, resetting the worst post and re-nailing the rails that had dropped and wiring the joints that were too loose for nails. She came back the next morning, and the next, and every morning for 2 weeks, arriving before dawn and leaving before Odell woke, mending the fence one section at a time, with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who approaches problems the way she approaches everything, directly, completely, without fanfare. She replaced 7 posts in those 2 weeks, re-nailed 43 rails, and restrung wire on 4 sections. She kept count, because she was the kind of person who keeps count, and the counting was its own satisfaction. Odell noticed that the fence was improving. He noticed it the way old men notice things, gradually, with the confused gratitude of someone who suspects he might be losing his mind, but hopes he is not. Posts that had been leaning were upright, plumb as the day they were set. Rails that had been on the ground were back in place, nailed firmly and leveled with a precision that suggested the repairer owned a spirit level and knew how to use it. Wire that had been slack was tight, twisted at the joints the way a person twists wire who understands that wire must be twisted tightly or not at all. The fence was being repaired, and the repairer was invisible, and the invisibility was both a mystery and a mercy. He mentioned it to his neighbor, Orville Cox, who lived north of the Crane property, and whose own fence was in better condition because Orville was 54 and could still swing a hammer. "My fence is mending itself," Odell said. He said it standing at Orville's gate, with the particular expression of a man who knows that fences do not mend themselves, but has no better explanation. Orville looked at him. Orville was not a man given to mystery or to keeping secrets that served no purpose. He was a man given to observation, which is the opposite of mystery and the enemy of it. "Your fence is not mending itself," Orville said. "Hazel Fairburn is mending it. She comes every morning before sunup. I have seen her from my kitchen window. She has been at it for 2 weeks." Odell stood at Orville's gate and absorbed this information and felt something that he had not felt in 6 years, not since Martha died, and the world became a place that was smaller and colder and more difficult to navigate. He felt seen. It was a feeling he had nearly forgotten existed, buried under 6 years of solitude and the gradual shrinking of a life that had once been large with purpose and was now small with routine. Not by Hazel, who had taken pains not to be seen, but by the evidence of her work, which was a kind of seeing in reverse, the act of a person who sees you so clearly that they know what you need and provide it without requiring you to ask. He waited for her the next morning. He sat on the porch in the dark, wrapped in a blanket against the October cold, and he watched the road until a figure appeared in the gray light, carrying a hammer and a sack of nails, and walking with the purposeful stride of a woman who has work to do, and intends to do it before the world wakes up. Hazel saw him on the porch. She stopped at the fence line, the hammer arrested in mid-swing of her arm, and looked at the old man in the blanket, and the old man looked at her, and the moment was the kind that small acts of kindness produce when they are discovered. Embarrassment mixed with tenderness, exposure mixed with gratitude, the particular vulnerability of a person caught doing something generous, and the particular vulnerability of a person who realizes they are the object of that generosity. "You are mending my fence," Odell said. "I am. You have been mending it for 2 weeks. 16 days. Why?" Hazel set down the hammer. She stood at the fence that she had been rebuilding one post at a time and looked at the man whose dignity she had been trying to protect by working before he woke. "Because the fence needed mending, and you could not mend it, and no one else was going to. And because you taught me to read when I was 7 years old in the schoolhouse on Plum Creek, and the reading changed my life, and a fence is not adequate payment for that, but it is what I have." Odell remembered. He remembered a small, serious girl with braids who sat in the front row and read aloud with a precision that was unusual for a child, and that suggested a mind that was organizing the world through language, the way other children organized it through play. He had taught her to read. He remembered the moment she understood that letters made words, and words made sentences, and sentences made worlds. The look on her face, the sudden intake of breath, the way her small finger traced the line in the primer with a new urgency, as though she had discovered a door she had not known existed and intended to walk through it immediately. He had taught dozens of children to read over 40 years, but the fence was being mended by this one, and the mending was a conversation that had started 26 years ago with the alphabet and had continued, silently, through every morning that Hazel Fairburn walked past his failing fence and decided to fix it. "Come inside," he said. "I have coffee." She came inside. She sat at his kitchen table and drank the coffee that was too strong, because Odell made it the way he had always made it, with more grounds than water and more stubbornness than skill, and they talked. They talked about the fence, and the schoolhouse, and the 26 years between those 2 points. The years when Hazel had grown from the small girl with braids into the woman with capable hands, and the years when Odell had grown from the vigorous young teacher into the old man on the porch. They talked about Martha, who had been a kind woman and a good wife, and who had kept the fence in repair by reminding Odell to do it every Saturday until he did. They talked about Hazel's brother in California, and her parents who died when she was 19, 1 month apart, as though neither could bear to leave the other behind. And the talking was not the conversation of strangers, but the conversation of people who share a history they had not fully recognized until now. The coffee grew cold. Neither of them noticed. The sun came up and filled the kitchen with October light, and they were still talking when the chickens at Hazel's place began their morning objections to not having been fed, which meant that Hazel's chickens would have to wait, which was a thing that had never happened before, and Hazel noted the unprecedented nature of it and found that she did not mind. Hazel finished the fence in November, the last section completed on a morning cold enough that her breath made clouds in the air, and the hammer handle was so cold it burned her bare hands. She also fixed the porch step that had been loose, replaced the shingle that had blown off the roof in September, and reorganized the woodpile in a manner that Odell declared was superior to any organizational system he had encountered in 40 years of teaching, which was a compliment that Hazel accepted with the same quiet satisfaction she brought to everything. She also mended 3 of his shirts, rehung the kitchen door that had been sticking, and cleaned the chimney flue, which had not been cleaned in 2 years, and which produced, upon cleaning, a quantity of soot that Hazel said was enough to fertilize a small garden, and which she used for exactly that purpose. The question of what came next was answered not by Odell and Hazel, but by the winter, which arrived in December with the force that Nebraska winters bring, and which made certain facts undeniable: that Odell could not manage the property alone, that Hazel's well was still dry, and the creek was freezing, that 2 people maintaining 2 separate houses a quarter-mile apart were spending twice the firewood and twice the effort that one household would require. It was Odell who suggested it, because Odell was a teacher, and teachers are trained to identify the obvious and state it clearly. "You should move in," he said. He said it over supper. She had been cooking supper for him 3 nights a week since the fence conversation, and the suppers had become the part of the week he most looked forward to, and the part he was most reluctant to examine too closely. The house is too large for one person, and too cold for an old man, and your well is dry, and your creek is frozen, and you are walking a quarter-mile in the snow to mend a fence that is already mended. The practical argument is overwhelming. And the impractical argument? The impractical argument is that I am 71 years old and you are 33, and the town will talk. The town talks about everything. The town talked when I mended your fence. The town will talk when I stop. I would rather be talked about for doing something sensible than for doing nothing at all. She moved in before Christmas. She brought her chickens and her tools and her small collection of books, the books that Odell had taught her to read, and she took the spare room, the room that had been Martha's sewing room, a coincidence that Hazel noted privately, and Odell noted aloud with the gentle sadness of a man who has made peace with his losses, and Odell kept his, and the arrangement was exactly as practical as both of them had claimed, and exactly as complicated as neither of them had admitted. Because the line between taking care of someone and loving someone is a line that practical people cross without noticing, and by the time they notice, the crossing is already done, and the only question is whether to acknowledge it or pretend it has not happened, and both of them were too honest for pretending. Orville Cox, who had been the one to solve the mystery of the fence, watched from his kitchen window as Hazel moved her things into Odell's house. He told his wife about it, and his wife said, "Good, that man needed someone, and that woman needed to be needed, and between the 2 of them they have more sense than the rest of the valley combined." They did not marry. Marriage at 71 is a formality that some men find important, and that Odell did not. What they had was something that did not require a ceremony to validate. A partnership built on a mended fence and a reading lesson, and the understanding that kindness given is not kindness lost, but kindness invested, and the returns are unpredictable and sometimes take 26 years to arrive, and sometimes arrive in forms that neither the giver nor the receiver anticipated. But arrive they do, on a cold morning before dawn, carrying a hammer and a sack of nails.